Hello, and welcome to I Am Dad podcast with your fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell. 30 minutes of wisdom, information, resources, and nuggets on your fatherhood journey. Or maybe you're just curious and want to hear some real talk about fatherhood, family, and the minds of men. Well, guess what? We got you too. Sit back, grab your pad and pen, and maybe even bring a little something to sip on. Enjoy 30 straight minutes of fatherhood, family, and fun with the fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell.
Welcome to I Am Dad podcast. I'm your host, Kenneth Braswell. We welcome you again to this podcast, the haven for exploring the depths and breadths of fatherhood in all its forms. Today's episode is a tapestry woven with threads of resilience, love, and wisdom as we sit down with Tammy and Jay Daughtry. From the hearts of Nashville, Tennessee, Tammy and Jay stepped into this space, bringing with them the lived experience of marriage and family therapists, and more intimately, as individuals who have navigated the turbulent waters of divorce and the tranquility harbors of remarriage. Their journey is a testament to the strength found in vulnerability, the clarity both born out of complexity, and the unyielding commitment to fostering healthy family dynamics. Join us as we unfold the chapters of their story, from the solitary paths of single parenthood to the united front of blended family. Through their work with Coparenting International and the Center for Modern Family Dynamics, they've illuminated paths for countless families wrestling with the realities of divided homes. With Tammy's co-parenting journey and Jay's recovery from loss, they stand as beacons of hope and exemplars of preservation. As we dive into the insights and anecdotes, prepare to be moved, educated, and inspired. This is not just a conversation, it's a shared experience with the power to change the narrative of co-parenting and blended family life. So whatever you are, settle in and let's welcome the voices of Tammy and Jay to I Am Dad podcast. How are you guys doing today? Yeah, ask that again. I had you on mute. How you guys doing today?
We're doing
good.
Great.
We're glad to be here.
Thank you so much. I
to
appreciate you guys. You know, I as the young folks say, low level stalk you guys and watching what you're doing and watching where you're going and watching your work and really looking always and seeking that opportunity that at some way and someday we can work together, because what I'm learning, Tammy and Jay, is that this work of fatherhood needs the bridge between the work that here and the work that we do with co-parenting, because that seems to be the central part of what they're struggling with. We can always teach an individual on how to do certain things with respect to parenting, but those things are being fathers, individual parents, but those things that demand us to be able to work together is where we kind of fall short sometimes, and we know that there's a clear connection and bridge between this work we do in fatherhood and the work that you guys are doing. If you haven't heard our podcast, we start each and every podcast with a simple question that gets us rolling in conversation, and I want to hear this question answered from both of you individually, and that is, tell me your daddy story.
Shall I go first?
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I'll try to give the shorter version. This could be an hour by itself, but I actually was born in Colorado, and there's a little farm town called Rocky Ford where my mom and dad were high school sweethearts, and I was a cart before the horse baby, as you might say, and they got married. However, they were divorced before I was one. But I will say that my dad stayed in my life. He made a lot of effort and sacrifice to come see me. I usually lived in a different town than him most of my life, after probably age 1 or 2. But somebody asked me once, where did I grow up? And I said, out there on I-25 between Denver, Colorado and Colorado Springs. And that's where he still lives today. And we've seen each other several times a year in my adult life. But when I was in, school, elementary, junior, and high school, he always made that drive north and came up to Denver to cheer for me, to be on the sidelines with a bouquet of flowers, to let me know that he cared. And I will say, when I was 3, I also gained a stepmom. We call her Grandma JoJo now, but back in the day, she was his wife and my stepmother, and she was a wonderful part of my childhood and my growing up years. So when I think about my dad, I think of Denver Bronco games and cheering for football and green chili, because I'm from a Hispanic family. Gallegos is my maiden name. So I think of that whole Gallegos family in Colorado, and still very proud to have that as my heritage. And so I'm grateful that my dad's still with us, and he's in his 70s now, and he's a little guy. I'm only 4'11". You can't tell because we're sitting down, but I got my my little stature from him, but and my extroverted personality. So he's been a great part of my life, even though I know as an adult looking back, it was hard, and he faced a lot of obstacles to have that relationship with me. But I'm very grateful that he never gave up.
Thank you for that one. Jay?
Yeah, for me, also a child of divorce, kind of similar things. I was the second oldest. So my first brother was their cart before the horse, the baby out of wedlock, just as they were finishing high school. And so, as was the thing back in the day, well, of course, you got to get married. So they go ahead and get married. And it was just, fire and oil. Gasoline, it just went up. They both came from very difficult circumstances in the sense that they both had raging alcoholic fathers. And so there was a lot of abuse. There was a lot of alcohol abuse. And of course, being in the 60s for them, there was a lot of drugs starting to make their way into the culture. And so they were both a mess. But somewhere along the way, my dad managed to realize, wait a minute, I can't do this. Can't go here. Can't be in this space. Got to do it differently than my dad did. And so, interestingly enough, by the time I come along, and then we have a younger brother yet as well. He was born in 67. So I guess by about 1968, my dad had full custody of 3 boys. And that's just really interesting, right? Because that doesn't happen often in America, especially not back then. But there was a reason for that, and that was because he stayed in the fight, so to speak. He recognized the problems, and he started working against those things and started doing things differently. So he's still alive today, thankfully. He remarried when I was about 7. So they've been together now for 50 years, and he's in his 80s. But one of the things that I realized about my dad is just the tenacity that was necessary to continue to stay in the fight, to not give up. It would have been easy to give up and say, well, this is too hard. I'm a single dad at 26 probably. I've got 3 kids. I'm trying to work 2 jobs, but he didn't take the easy route. He worked hard. And I think, a big part, I have to say, a big shout out to my grandmother, his mom. But our grandma was kind of the glue that held things together. And she did some important things by stepping in and making sure that once a week, or at least every other week, she would take us 3 boys and give my dad a couple of nights to just relax and maybe go out and get in the dating scene and all that sort of thing. But there was a lot of foresight and kindness and intentionality in the way that she pulled us in and loved us real well, and let dad have some space, because, at 26, 27 years old, he had a lot of life ahead of him, and he needed somebody. And grandma knew about the only way he was going to find somebody is if she got us monkeys off of his back, long for him to have some space. But he's been a very involved father and made a great effort to be a part of everything we did. Were there holes? There, absolutely. Right. There are things he didn't know and still struggles with because he really didn't have a healthy father figure in any way. But he figured out ways to do it differently. He didn't beat us the way his father beat him. He didn't let alcohol take control of his life and use it as an excuse to do all the harsh things that his father had done for him and the way he ran the household. So so it was a different generation, as I like to call it. I mean, he trim the family tree, right?
Mm-hmm.
In his version of discipline with his father, he and his older brother, my Uncle Jack, discipline to them was coming home after school and finding your drunken father there for a change instead of out womanizing and running around. And him taking you down to the basement, throwing you in the corner of the basement, pulling his belt off and beating him until your arm's tired. That was discipline. That's what, was discipline in their household. And it was harsh. It was brutal. Somewhere along the way, my dad realized, no, can't do that. And I don't know, he just, this is a very practical thing that he did. I'm not sure, if it was great but it worked, and it moved us from where we were to a new place. And somewhere along the way, someone gave him the idea, probably my grandmother, and she said, listen, Jess, don't grab things. If you're going to have to spank your kids, use your hand, because it's going to hurt your hand like it hurts them. Always smack them on the backside, never in their face or any other part of the body, and only swat them 3 times. And so he literally put those protocols in place to be sure that the rage that he carried in himself didn't take him to places that he had been. And so literally that trimmed the family tree in an amazing way to keep him present in our life. Because otherwise he probably would have lost us. And I'm not sure where we'd have been, because my bio mom was a mess. She chased addiction all of her life and died from that same addiction probably 5 years ago now, at the age of 71 or so.
Yeah.
So Dad was there, did the job, he stayed present, and he worked really, really hard to make things different than what he experienced, because he had a very negative experience.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that everything happens on purpose, right? Everything in life for us happens on purpose. And that the burden that God places on us may seem unfair. But when you look back on it, he gave it to you because he knew you can handle it. He knew you could pull it through, and he knew he could pull purpose from it. Right. And so when I see and hear the stories from both of you, which is why I love to start this show off by telling those stories, it's because we can learn so much by how we were parented, because we understand very clearly that we parent the way we were parented, or we learn about parenting from the way we were parented. And we either duplicate that or be inspired to change that one way or the other. But when you look back at your collective lives, and you probably shared those stories with each other, and at some point there was a moment and both of you were like, you know what, our shared experience can do something very powerful. Like, what was that moment like, and how did you make that decision to begin to start taking those stories and taking that life experience and doing the great work that you're doing today?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll say I agree with what you said about the burdens and how they can become blessings. And I think I always tell people, God never wastes our pain. He always recycles it and repurposes it. And I'll say, before I met Mr. Wonderful, which is, that's actually what I call Jay, is Mr. Wonderful. But prior to meeting him, I had gone through a divorce. I'd been married 8 years, had a little daughter at the end of that marriage. And I was looking for ways to co-parent that would be whole, healthy, and peaceful. Because having grown up in a divided family, I knew what the experience would be for a child. I knew the pain points, I knew the blessings, I knew some of the challenges, schedule and location wise. So I was looking for resources from people 5 and 10 years ahead of me who were doing a great job co-parenting. And in the year 2000, I couldn't find anything. And so I had been an event producer in the music industry, and I just was so unsatisfied that there were not hope-filled events and resources for divided co-parents, that I decided one day to start planning events for divorced parents and trying to infuse hope into their life and help them find a roadmap for how to co-parent in a healthy way. And so I had started Co-Parenting International before I met Mr. Wonderful. But my big prayer was, as we started doing events, and I had gone off to grad school to get a master's in marriage and family to work with high conflict co-parents. And I was starting my practicum. And my big request to God, if there was going to be anybody in the future, I wanted somebody who had a deep compassion for single parents, but who had a different story than mine. And so as I was producing events and I started writing a book and just had some different ways I was trying to bring hope to hurting parents, when our lives intersected, it was awesome because, well, awesome in a bittersweet way. His journey into single parenting was very different than mine. And as we got married and I, continued the work I was doing, he jumped right in. And ever since 2009, anything we do, whether it's an event, an article, anything, he always gives it a huge upgrade. And so I think God was very faithful to answer my prayer as somebody who would care about single parents and have a different story. And together, I think we have made, it's so much fun what we get to do. And, some of our friends, I've heard people say, oh, I could never work with my husband or wife 24/7, but we love it. And we love working together, traveling and speaking together. And so, back to your original question, really just, I had a dream over 20 years ago that I wanted people who were just at the beginning of a divorce, or maybe they were never married, maybe they're 5 years down the road and they've been in and out of court, but I wanted them to find some hope and some solutions and some real life strategies that they could implement so that they would be healthier and their children could thrive. And as we have continued to follow that passion, it expands and changes over the years. And we're doing some really cool stuff now that neither one of us recognized in the beginning of our relationship that we'd be doing, but doing it together is awesome. And I think part of what's really powerful for parents is, moms get to hear a dad's perspective, dads get to hear a mom's perspective, and we both just bring a lot of repurposed pain into what we share with other people. And it really turns out to inspire them towards hope.
As you go ahead, Jay, I want to hear that.
Well, for me, obviously I came into the single parenting journey in a different way. Actually married my high school sweetheart. We had been together for 26 years, starting in high school through college, got married after college, had been married for 21 years, had 3 kids, and lost her in a car accident. So I became single through death, became a single dad in a moment on a Sunday afternoon back in 2006. So it was a very different journey. And I walked out that single dad journey for about 3.5 years before meeting Tammy. And what was interesting is when we met, she was finishing her master's in marriage and family therapy. And so if you know what they do in a master's program, at the end of it all, you have what they call their comprehensive exam, right? And so basically everything you've learned the last 3 years is piled into this ridiculous 4-hour exam. And so she hates tests to begin with and was absolutely freaked out by it all. But she was in the middle of studying for those comprehensive exams as she was finishing up her internship. And so as we met and started to fall in love and do life together a little bit, I became her study buddy. Mm-hmm. And as I was helping her learn and remember the things that she had been working on over the last 3 years, there was something that woke up inside of me. The first half of my life, I was a pastor. I'd been an ordained minister in Church Nazarene, did that for almost 25 years. And so I'm there working with her in this space. And it was just this awakening in me going, look, this is part of what's been missing, because no matter what hat you wear in the church, 80% of what you're doing is relational work in some form of counseling, right? And there was just points at which I was trying to help a student or a family or a couple. And I would just think to myself, what's missing here? There's something missing. I understand all the spiritual part and I'm giving them everything I can, but there's just something else that needs to be there. And what I found out was, what was missing was my understanding of our emotional and relational selves as God had designed us. And that's something that, today in culture, we talk about it more, right? Mental health and all the rest, we're talking about it more. But the practical application and recognizing that just as there are foundational truths that help us figure out how to facilitate healing to our physical bodies. We all know that. You break an arm, you go to the doctor. You get sick, you go and you find out what it is and how to treat it, that sort of thing. But we still struggle within our culture to understand that, hey, if I'm hurting and broken in some way, relationally, emotionally, there are people who have studied and understood those foundational truths that could help me facilitate my emotional healing. And so that was what I was starting to learn as I was helping her. And so as I helped her study and I really started to take that in, I just felt this strong pull that, this is something I need to put in my heart and life. So I followed her about a year later into my own journey into getting a master's in marriage and family therapy, because I felt like I needed that part. And so it was just sort of a natural fit as God was drawing me into that space that she was already in, and recognizing, wow, there's something here to speak to. The other part of it, though, was in my master's program in a divorce recovery class, there was a realization as we talked about all the various dynamics that were a part of that, and how to serve those dynamics and the research and all this and that. There was just this realization that, well, wait a minute, I grew up in a step family. Mm-hmm. I had a stepmom and a stepsister. Mm-hmm. Never really talked about it or thought about it that way. And then there was this realization that there was something missing in all of that. And that was my own mother.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
That throughout that entire process, all of those years of my mom and stepmom and dad being married, somehow my biological mother and my brothers, right? These three boys, their biological mother was marginalized and kept way out on the periphery of life. Mm-hmm. So much so that we barely had a relationship with her at all. Most of that was probably her own fault. But there was something that I learned as I started to understand the power and the necessity of co-parenting. It left me and my brothers with this deep, deep pain. There was a hole inside of us that we needed, even though she was broken and she probably was not able to be a mother to us. We needed some connection. We needed some access. We needed to know that the woman that we loved so dearly, innately, loved us in some way, right? And we were never given that chance. And so it was a view of understanding co-parenting and how, and I'm saying this not because my parents, I can put a word around it. What I want to be sure people understand is I'm not accusing my parents of alienating my mother, but parental alienation is one of the most toxic and troubling issues for separated families. And whether it's the mother or the father being alienated, the folks that are losing are the kids. Absolutely. Yeah. Because they definitely need access to both parents. Yes, if there are safety issues, there's a big difference between an uncooperative co-parent and an unsafe co-parent. And so we always have to take that into mind, and we have to do what's necessary to protect the children in that process. But by and large, the majority of those parents on either side of that equation of a divided family are both valuable and necessary. And anytime we marginalize one or the other, we're doing it at the expense of our kids. And so as I started to see and understand that in my own life, because I was living that experience and I was seeing what she was doing about that, it just was a natural fit to say, yeah, okay, this makes sense. I can speak to this. It matters to me. And I think there's value in helping people understand how to do all of this differently. Because let's face it, the divorce rate then and now is still very high, probably close to 60%. That doesn't include all of the young people who go ahead and cohabitate and create babies and start a life together, but never get married. And so there's just a ton of people out there walking through this space. And very few of them have any understanding and have been given any kind of tools on how to do this well. And so in the end, what happens when we don't have those tools, when we don't have anybody speaking hope and health and help into that space, is that the kids are the ones who suffer. and they grow up with very broken images of what relationships look like, and then they go and repeat the same thing. And so, our hope is that at some point, as we do the work God's called us to do, we start to see that cycle get broken, and that there's less broken families, and that there's less division in family and less divorce, and that kids are growing up whole and healthy, having healthy relationships, building healthy families, and living life in a way that God had always desired for them to be living that way.
Yeah, we're all we all, are led by our faith. There's a conversation that's taking place, or at least I've been increasing this conversation or elevating this conversation around this whole notion of faith-based. And so there was a meeting that took place not too long ago in HHS where they brought together what they described as faith-based organizations. And my question was, when I looked at Fathers Incorporated, I was like, well, I don't self-describe Fathers Incorporated as faith-based, but I'm faith-led. And everything that I do is based in faith. So I know the same thing for you guys as well, which is what makes that comfortable. But when you include that piece of it into your work, how much of that becomes the glue of what you sit in terms of how you serve people, understanding that it is your faith that leads you in many of the directions that you go into?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because in the same way, we had a very clear understanding early on when we developed our curriculum, One Heart, Two Homes, right, to help parents. We realized, well, this isn't just something we're speaking to the church. This isn't and doesn't need to be a Bible study or a faith-based curriculum, and it's not. Nevertheless, as you said, we're faith-led folks, so I guess in some way those breadcrumbs are there, but we know that as long as we continue to speak truth and we allow ourselves to be open to whatever new truths we're discovering as we do this work, that the author of truth has put those nuggets of truth out there for us to discover. And as he reveals those to us and we discover those, we can apply those, and we don't have to do it with a Bible in our hand. We can do it with the Spirit in our heart, and we know and trust that God is speaking through that as well. Because what we do know is definitely a lot of parents who go through this pain of a divided and divorced family. Many of them are angry, and they're angry at the church, and they're angry at God. And I can understand that, because the church, traditionally has not responded really well to those kinds of situation. And as Tammy used to say, like walking around with a big D on your forehead now, and people looking at you sideways, and sometimes pastors asking you not to be a part of that singles group or that Bible study, because the married couples feel awkward that there's a single mom in the group. And it's just like, you go, whoa, wait a minute, that's out of bounds. Why would we think that way? But to your point, I think we've come to a place where we recognize that the presence within us will come to where it needs to be in that moment, and that we trust God to do that in the ways that he needs to and wants to. Meanwhile, we just go out and speak the truth, and we disseminate hope, and we point towards better things.
Well, and I would say part of, in the very beginning, when this idea that we could bring hope to hurting parents, I thought, well, where do you find these parents? You find them around the schools, because their kids are in school, and you find them at the church. And like Jay said, a lot of people going through any tragedy in life, whether it's a death, a divorce, a loss of a job, it rattles people's faith sometimes. And so when we created One Heart, Two Homes, we intentionally interviewed a lot of high-level experts. We talked to young people. We talked to adult children of divorce. And all throughout, we asked, there's 31 guests on the videos, we asked them to answer the questions in a way that we could share this knowledge and this insight in a public school, because our goal was to reach hurting parents everywhere. And I'm grateful to say that even, you can look at our curriculum, look at all the people who were on it. There are some notable folks in the faith-based community, but even they gave their hope and their strategies and their stories in a way that we can share that in public schools, in public counseling agencies. Social workers can use it to bring hope to parents, because regardless of what someone's faith is, if they are living with children back and forth, we say one heart, two homes. So this kid who goes back and forth between mom's house and dad's house, and maybe a whole group of kids, siblings, if that experience is happening to a child, we have ideas and solutions on how to help that child or children thrive between homes. And you don't have to have a spiritual lens or understanding. Anybody who believes anything, if your kids are in a divided home, we have something that will help them and help you, and we will bring hope to the whole situation. And I will say it's exciting, to be on some national platforms and places that takes our content into certain kinds of organizations. We're in 4,000 pregnancy centers right now, advocating for co-parenting even before babies are born, because a lot of babies that come through that route, they don't couple up and marry or live together or stay together, but we want to keep dads involved. And so for about 5-6 years now, we've been working, another organization asked, hey, can we platform your videos into these 4,000 pregnancy centers to advocate for dads being a co-parent? We're like, yes. It's so cool, because that was not an initial target of our demographic we were reaching, but it's kind of like the fish and the loaves. It's like it keeps getting repurposed and reaching new places and helping parents of all ages understand there's a way through this and you don't have to go alone. And even if, one of the tough topics we tackle in our videos is, what if I'm co-parenting with somebody who's not been safe? And we dig into that topic to give people tools around understanding emotional abuse and how to co-parent with someone who's been really difficult. Right. And so it's not a lighthearted cotton candy conversation. We get into some of the hard stuff, but we wanted to give people a pathway through it, and then point them obviously to some of their local resources as well. And so we, when this all started, again, I can remember back because we just celebrated our 20-year anniversary of Co-Parenting International. And we went back to the place, literally the table that Jay and I met at is where we held the event. And we invited people there to celebrate with us. And we kind of told some of these storylines as far as all that's expanded in the last 20 years. And I would have never dreamed we'd be doing all the cool things we're doing now. And we are here in California right now because we are speaking at the Fatherhood and Family Coalition of America has a conference here. I think they're on their 25th year. And we got invited out here to talk about dads. In Tennessee, they asked us to speak at the Amplifying Fatherhood Conference. And I am elated about that. Not because I don't believe moms matter, but I think cheering for fathers, especially in the equation of co-parenting, that's how we help save the next generation. Because if fathers know they matter and they stay in the game and they don't give up, and we help moms navigate how to work with them and try to help everybody recognize that the kids need the best of their two parents, then we heal the child's future by giving them the freedom to love both. And that's not an easy thing to do. Yeah. I mean, my journey, I'm 54 now. My parents have been apart since I was 53. And there were marked moments in my life that worked well and marked moments that it didn't. But they didn't have any tools. They didn't have any roadmap. They didn't have any guidance. And I will say that we, in our blended family now, all the kids are adults. 2 of them are married. We have 5.5 grandkids. We got number 6 coming in September. But the daughter that I co-parented with her dad, she is now 25. She is happily married. She has a thriving career, an amazing husband. And my greatest joy, to be honest, is to see her believe all along that marriage mattered. And I always championed the idea for her that she could go on and have a once-in-a-lifetime marriage and thrive. And I believe with her generation, her and Jackson, they're gonna do that. And so the repetitive cycle stops here, as of the divided or divorced families. And so, her dad, it was a beautiful wedding. Jay walked me in and kissed me as I sat on the front row. He grabbed his guitar and he played this beautiful song that he had written for Angelia. And then her dad walked her in, and her stepmom was right there, and our family celebrated. And that to me was the moment that I'd always dreamed we'd have. Love her well. We'd walk together, and it takes special people to do that. And I will say, this guy, part of why I call him Mr. Wonderful, one of the first things I told him when we were dating is, my daughter is 8, almost 9 years old, and her dad's very involved in her life, and we co-parent and we communicate, and we meet at McDonald's once a month for a co-parent meeting. He's married. She's got a great stepmom. And so there's all these people in my life. And, I figured if that scared him, I'd tell him early to scare him away. But he was not intimidated. And he just stepped into that with such love and strength. And I remember the first time he and my daughter's dad met, and they were respectful and kind. And it's always been that way. And, he started coming to the McDonald's meetings with me. And there we were, 4 parents with 4-day timers planning summer vacation and schedules and all the things. And, the 4 of us adults, though we were there for one purpose, we always brought a different perspective.
Right.
And so these co-parent meetings, I am so grateful that Angelia's dad and I started that in the very beginning, so that we would not be trying to have those co-parent meetings at handoffs or ball games or, ballet recitals or volleyball. We never did that. And that's the one thing, Ken, for anybody who's listening that is a co-parent or knows a co-parent, when people ask me that elevator question, like, what's one thing? I say, never talk about co-parent business at the handoff. Don't ever talk about it. Don't talk about money, schedule, none of it. Keep the handoff as positive and bright and happy as possible. And I tell people, remember your facial expression, your tone of voice, and your body language. Those 3 things, when you do that handoff about 700 times in your child's life, that right there is going to define a huge piece of what they look back and remember. And if you do that well, and you have co-parent meetings, either by phone or McDonald's or wherever, and you don't talk about business at the handoff, then you save the sanity of your children and you save your own.
Right.
Because you go to a meeting and okay, this is what we're here to do. We're here to have business meeting about our children. And sometimes we might see it the same, and sometimes we might not. But we come there respectfully, and we value and respect each other. That's where the hard conversations happened. And everywhere else we showed up, we were a peaceful team. And even at McDonald's, we didn't get into hard arguments necessarily, but we had different opinions. But that one thing, I believe, over, again, she's 25 now. And, the last co-parent meeting we had was planning her high school graduation. And then, of course, working together, planning her wedding. There's so much after the paperwork is over and the divorce decree or the co-parent parenting is over. Like, that's when the hard stuff really starts and the good stuff starts. But doing that really did protect Angelia. She never saw us argue or disagree. And she had a peaceful experience when we were all there.
Right.
And she never worried if we were going to have an argument, at the volleyball game or at the handoff. She just didn't carry that anxiety, because we proved to her and modeled for her, here's how healthy co-parents are going to act.
Right.
We're going to let you do your thing as a kid and have a great childhood. And we're going to be respectful and keep that business behind the scenes. And so all that to say, the organization is great and all the things we do are great, but I believe there are thousands of co-parents who are doing that piece really well now. So those kids are having healthier childhoods and possibly having the peace to grow up and believe that they can go on, get married, and have their own families. And so that's the part that really excites me, is trying to give people those practical tools. And yes, it's faith-led, as you said, but these tools are available and helpful to anybody anywhere they live and whatever they believe. If they love their kids, we've got what they need.
Yeah, there's so many different directions I want to get in, and I'm looking at my time, and I'm like, my goodness, is about over, and I have not talked about 1,000 things I wanted to talk about, which means I'm gonna have to have y'all back on so that we can strip apart some of this other stuff. But there's a couple of elements that I want to hear from you guys about as you were talking. This whole thing about complexity, right? People just don't, when I look back at the word, in Genesis, where it starts with finding a good thing and then coming together and becoming one, right? That was God's simplicity for this is the infrastructure that's going to make you the strongest to raise your children. And when that structure is not in place, being parents will become complex because now you have to deal and consider more people than you would have to consider if it was just the two of you, right? I remember when my wife and I met, we had this very conversation as you and Jay had, and I said to her, I said, you have, and I think Amber was about 8 or 9 also at the time, and then Zinga was younger than her. And I remember having this conversation with her and saying, we have a multiplicity of relationships to make sure that they function right. And if any one of those relationships don't work, we don't work. And I had this graph and I drew it out on this piece of napkin for her. And I was like, if my relationship with your daughter doesn't work, we don't work. If our relationship with my daughter with you doesn't work, if my relationship between my daughter and your daughter doesn't work, we don't work. If the relationship between her mother don't work, we don't work. If the relationship between me and her father, we don't work. I said, so we're not 18 years old getting married and we only have to worry about one relationship. We got 8 or 9 of them right now. And every time a new person comes into the place, it makes that even more complex. Do you think people understand that when in the beginning, when they are having these conversations or not?
No, I would say, I remember one time sitting at breakfast at the Fatherhood Commission, and we were, Dr. Hairston.
Oh, yes.
And he was thinking about having us come up and talk. And he said, so, what's the one thing you would say to folks who are doing blended family, And I thought for a second, and the thing that came to my mind is exactly what you're talking about. And we call it competing attachments, right? So in psychology, attachment is the word we use to express the science of love, right? So as they studied how we connect, there's this attachment that grows. And so, of course, the first and most powerful attachment that anybody has is with their parent, right? So you're born and you have a child, and there's an instant thing that happens there. It's innate, it grows stronger, all of that sort of thing. And so imagine this, as you talked about when you looked at that graph, well, what you were talking about is competing attachments. Because, right here, we've got a developing attachment. It's not complete yet. Right. We've just met, and headed down that path and dated and whatnot and so forth. Now we're getting married. But then her and Angelia, they have this bio attachment. It's solidified. It's real. It's got history behind it. All the rest. Same thing with my kiddos, right? I've got 3 kids over here. I have bio attachment with them. It's solidified. It's real. And so, yeah, you're right. Most people don't know. And it's probably the dynamic that creates the most problems because they don't see it coming and they don't understand it. Everybody's happy and they're moving toward each other. And then they end up in the same space and start doing life. And without realizing it, I call it, waking a sleeping dragon. We touch on one of those competing attachments in a negative way. And all of a sudden something rears up and we end up with scorched earth, right? Going, what just happened, as we smolder and smell the sulfur, we're like, wow, didn't know what happened there. But that's the thing, So for me, a way to explain this is We like to use the phrase biofog and step vision, right? And so what we're talking about there is, for my biological children, I'll always have what we call biofog. And what we mean by that is I have a very subjective, nurturing view of my children, right? And with that innate attachment that's so strong, if she has a problem with one of these kiddos and it's legitimate, maybe they didn't pick up their socks or didn't do their dishes, or, a whole list of expectations that they either, failed on, did things they shouldn't, or didn't do things they should, right? And she's bringing that up. I know intellectually she's correct. Emotionally, I have a competing attachment now. My attachment to my new wife, that is developing, right? It's still not solidified yet. It's in process. But then I have this fully developed attachment over here, and the biofog that goes with it that is contextualizing, right? It's like, oh yeah, I know he didn't pick up his socks, honey, and I get that because, well, they're doing the choir show rehearsals and everything. So he's at rehearsals and everything. He gets home late and he's tired and he doesn't do things, but he'll take care of it. We'll get it right, blah, 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 right? So I'm contextualizing, kind of making excuses because I'm being very subjective about what's happening with my son, right? Where on the other hand, her step vision in that moment is very objective. It's black and white. It's real clear, right? It's like, oh, here's the thing that should have been done. This is what happened. And now that's the problem, right? So how do we handle that? And so the problem with that, though, is when she's speaking to my bio child, that step vision to me can seem harsh. Why are you so hard on my kids? How come you're so mean to John? Right? It can feel that way to me, even though I know she's not trying to be mean and she's not necessarily being mean. And so that biofog and that step vision are just expressions of that deeper competing attachment. And in the same way, if I have to deal with Angelia on something, she's immediately going to be pulled into the middle. And she's going to strike a defensive posture, whether she wants to or not, because it's emotional. And so, as is true with all emotional things, the biggest thing we can learn to do is slow things down. Give ourselves time to think about it clearly, call our own fouls, right? So if I'm having a whole bunch of biofog about my son not picking up his socks, I've got to tell myself that. Because if she tells me that, I just get more defensive, right? It is some step vision over this whole sock issue. For me, I can't point at her and say, quit being such a harsh step vision, unconnected, unattached, stepmom. That's not going to help. She's got to call her own fouls. And that's never more true than in step family, blended family dynamics, because that competing attachment is always present in lots of different ways. And it even goes outside the family.
I was just getting ready to say that, because I was getting ready to say, so now you're dealing with the fog and the vision, and you got this child that's going home Friday at 5:00. Had the handoff, and there's this conversation that takes place, and now they're sharing their perspective of what they saw, not your perspective of what was going on. Now this other party who's also an attachment sees it a whole nother way, and now they pick up the phone and they're calling you. How come you didn't take up and blah blah blah, and then that's what leads to the scorched earth, right?
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's a big part of it.
Absolutely. And the co-parenting in all of that is tricky, because part of what also happens at the other house, if that parent is recoupled, then their expectations and the way they run their house with the new person influences the shared child, and then that comes back over here. And I can tell you, with the kids I work with, there are so many kids that in one household, just something like a cell phone, right? Oh, they can have their cell phone in their room. They keep it all night. They use it for an alarm clock. But at the other house, somebody wants them to turn it in, and they're like, you can't take my phone. My other parent pays for it, right? And then those kinds of things come in, sometimes never intentionally, but the child will try to drive the most, the best outcome they can get in the middle of everything. And it is such a difficult scenario. And between the two things I see teenagers and their parents struggle with in any household are cell phones and cars. But then you take a kid who's got those two things and they live between mom's house sometimes and dad's house sometimes. And boy, howdy, you've got a lot of moving parts that are critical. And if there's ever a time co-parents need to rally and bio parents and step parents need to rally, are on those two areas,
Right.
and figure out how do we work together to keep our kids safe on the road. You don't just turn keys over to a kid. You hopefully have a plan, you have some parameters, but these cell phones that are given to kids when they're 4, 5, 6 years old with no parameters can become just as destructive to a life and an identity and everything, because all that's good on the internet, there's 10 times that's bad. And so sometimes when the kid is so attached to their phone or their video games, and then in one house, it didn't happen with us necessarily, but one parent is like, yeah, let them play a couple hours. And the other one's like, no, I think his time's up. That's stress here. And then that stress that comes and goes from the other side, they may try to undermine this household, and it becomes a train wreck. And anyway, so yes, co-parenting on steroids is
And
and the parents.
yeah, the
Crazy.
other interesting thing is, so this is another conversation that I've been having, as I'm doing this work and thinking more and more about this, particularly here with our dads. We have several curriculums, but the two main ones is our fatherhood curriculum and our life skills curriculum. And we always run our
Okay.
fathers through the life skill curriculum before they run through the fatherhood curriculum. And people say, well, why do you do that? And my answer is because there are certain life skills that we have to ensure that people have before we start talking to them
Yes.
about being parents.
Yes.
And as a result of that, the number one priority is to put them in position to be able to manage relationships, period. Not just romantic relationships, not just co-parenting relationships, teaching them the principles of managing relationships, because that's where the management of this scenario we're talking about comes into play. Because now you're trying to manage relationships with emotion, which makes it even more difficult to do. But if you have
Right.
one person in that
Yeah.
space who isn't relational and doesn't understand that in this conversation, I could be damaging a relationship right now that I can't come
Right.
back from. And one of the more
Yeah.
critical relationships is the relationship between whichever parent and the child, right? Because my daughter,
Yes.
I remember Tammy and Jay, we were having a conversation one time, and this is a couple of years ago, and we were talking about, she was telling me about something that happened between her and Tracy when she was younger. And she was trying to describe it to me, and I was like, oh, I don't remember that. And she says, yeah, I remember it because you took her side, right? She's 20 years old. Right. Some of our children can carry that as a memory. Some of them can
Sure.
carry it as a reason to never connect to you because you did not take up for me in a space where I believe you should have taken care of me. Right. And so I want you to speak a little bit about this issue of non-resident, right? Because that's the conversation that's taking place now around non-residency. And so I was telling my daughter just had her first child. She's 24 years old. She just had her first child. She's one of those that you were talking about, not married, not even thinking about married. She's okay with the father of her child. She has her own business. He has his thriving business, and they decided they want to have a baby, and this is how we're going to do it. And like, everything in my system is like, whoa, that's not how I was taught how it go. But she's a Generation Zer, right? And I have to go with this new generation of children. But I was saying to her, I said, as great, now this is one of my children that I have been intimately connected to since birth, I mean, she's my
Yes.
baby. But I was
Mm-hmm.
non-resident. And I said to her, I said, do you know that there's certain things that I don't know about you that is of no fault of you, me, or your mom? I said, I don't know what it's like to come into the kitchen and see you standing in the refrigerator door. I don't know what it's like to be sitting on the couch and randomly decide to watch a show together. I don't know what it's like to be in the house and randomly be able to see that you have a mood change, or you came in and you had a bad day, or you had a good day, or you broke up with your
Mm-hmm.
boyfriend that I didn't know about, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on with you. I said, so as much as we are attached, the very fact that we don't live together on a day-to-day basis
Mm-hmm.
allows me to miss very intimate moments with you and you with me. And those are the bonding moments that strengthen our relationship. And we have to be mindful of those things. And the other parent has to be mindful of those things as well. When you're talking,
Yeah.
as you were raising your children and thinking about when your children were moving back and forth, did you ever have those moments where you were kind of dealing with something that you really had no control over, only because of proximity of the child?
Well, sure. I mean, Angelia's dad lived 10 minutes from us, and from the very beginning, I wanted 50-50. I wanted him to have 50%. So in doing that, there's a lot you miss.
Mm,
And but, on my side, but I also tried to make that choice from the perspective of wanting her to have as much of each of us as
mm,
possible. And so we might have had more time around her, but there were significant moments in her life that could only happen once and happen in one place. And so there was a couple scenarios where things she experienced that were really big and awesome and exciting happened on her time with her dad. And then other things happened on my time. And what I tried to do, and this is a little off topic, but we really did try to check in and share that stuff with each other as parents. And if something happened at his house that was a really big deal and a positive thing, he would call and try to include me as much as possible or invite me to the next step of that
mhm,
thing. And we did that as well. Um, but I do think there's a grief and a loss that parents have when you're not with your kids all the time. We do miss a lot. And I think with today's technology, part of what may help with some of that, I know some kids, they'll do FaceTimes and video chats with their parents, and there's a little deeper connection when you're doing that than just talking on an audio phone. Um, but I think, I tell dads, especially all the time, that have the least amount of time, sadly, in a lot of situations, I always tell them it's not always the quantity, it is the quality.
mhm,
And no matter where you are, whether you see your child for 4 hours on a Saturday once a month, or you have overnights 50% of the time, show up and be fully present in those times, because though you may miss a lot, that deeply matters to your kids.
mhm,
And when they know that you're willing to put it all on the table for whatever amount of time you're given, which again, I'm a 50-50 person. I believe in that. I advocate for that. When it's geographically and safety wise, it's all available for parents to do that. That's always my first choice, because I don't want parents and kids to miss out. I want them to have as much time together as possible. But when you miss something that's important, still try to celebrate that with your child, and that part of you that feels disappointed and sad, or I mean, there's deep grief in some of the things we miss.
mhm,
Process that with another adult. Still show up and give your child the support, the enthusiasm, the encouragement. Way to go. And try to let them off the hook for what you feel, because
mhm,
at the end of the day, kids feel guilty no matter. I've talked to lots of kids, even in 50-50 families, they feel guilty. They know that one parent misses out on stuff, and they know that there's an imbalance. Even if it is equal on paper, they still feel bad about not being with both parents all the time. And so I think the things we can do is be affirmative, be supportive, And more than anything, give our kids emotional permission to love that other parent, especially when we're not there all the time. Because that's the gift for the child as they grow up. I think that's what keeps them coming back to us, is when we encourage them and be thankful that they're connected to their other parent. And we don't put our little sarcasm comments in or guilt bombs. Then they grow up and they can come back and share things with us. And obviously your daughter feels very comfortable with you to bring that up. You know, she trusts you. She knows that your relationship can revisit things. And sometimes we revisit and repair, or we just revisit and it goes away, you know? So I don't know if I got any of the answers.
Yeah,
you were
you
looking
did.
for there.
I'm caught up in listening to you, as I'm sure most people will be caught up in listening to the two of you. I'm just like, I'm deep in this one. And so this co-parenting thing has become something that is looming large in my life right now, to really try to figure out how to bring this to the forefront, to continue to do this fatherhood stuff, but to bridge this thing, which is at some point I really will be talking to you guys about trying to help me think about, you know, how we bridge this work and make this work, this bridging of this work, a model for how we do true family development. When I say true family development, I'm talking true family development. And so what's the next big idea? What you guys got up your sleeves? I know you got something big. Where you going from here?
Oh gosh. Well, I suppose what?
Go ahead.
Unplanned. Yeah. So, you know, interestingly enough, the co-parenting that we do, we found that it was something that they use in pregnancy centers on a regular basis. Long and short of it is, you know, two things that move young people toward, you know, a life-giving choice in that situation. Number one is, you know, heartbeat of the baby and seeing the baby in a sonogram. But the second thing, and this was the surprise to us, is co-parenting skills and an understanding of how to raise the child if you don't come together. And so they started finding that, you know, these young men in particular, a lot of them would really push off because they thought, well, now I have to get married. And I have to, you know, we've got to, and so without an understanding of, no, there's a different path. Actually, you can be a co-parent and you can do this differently. You can raise kids in two homes, be involved in their life, raise them whole and healthy, whether or not you get married. That's a decision that you can, you know, figure out along the way, but you're always going to be a father to this child, right? And so having that helps them out. And so part of what we started to understand is, you know, there's a space there to help young men understand that. But then even before that, there's this space where you have unplanned grandparents, right? That's a journey for us. Our second daughter in her sophomore year of college, you know, comes home and explains to us, hey, I'm pregnant. And we're like, oh, okay, wow. Didn't even know you had a boyfriend, but we'll get back to that. But what's interesting is I think about that and I go, well, wait a minute. We have 4 kids. 3 of them are daughters. What is the possibility that something like this would be in our story? Well, it's very strong, actually, right? And we never talked about it. We never thought it through. We never imagined that moment to be prepared for it. And that's usually the case for most. And so part of what we wanted to do is create a resource for, you know, pregnancy centers to use, for churches or whoever is wanting this resource, to get it out there into the hands of parents of young people, so that if that day ever comes, they're prepared for it. And so that day one for them, as we call it, right? That day one, when you first find out, you're going to set the trajectory for that whole experience, really, in a lot of ways. And so being able to start well is really, really important. Not that you can't redeem it if you start poorly, but if you start well, it's just so much easier. There's less to have to pick up, to rein in, and to bring back into that space. And so So we want to talk to those unplanned grandparents and give them an idea. There's a statistic I'll share really quick, and that is that 30% of young people have gotten pregnant by the time they're 20, right? So when you think about that, whether you have daughters or sons or both, 1 in 3 is going to be pregnant before they're 20. So all of us, just about, all of us at some point should be prepared for that kind of a conversation and to give a sense of hope and direction, to, be honest about the challenges, but also to fill the hearts of those very afraid young people with a sense of hope and a recognition that they're not alone in all of this.
Yeah.
And what I have come to see is that sometimes that first reaction, or what happens in the first week or two of the announcement that the young lady or man, tell their parents, what happens initially is so, like he said, it sets the trajectory, and you don't get a do-over there. And a lot of parents will, oh, you made your bed, go lie in it, right? They push their kids out. They're like, okay, oh, you want to live like that? Okay, go live together. We're not going to support that. And man, if there is ever a time that a young person, no matter what age they are, even a 27-year-old young professional who didn't plan to have this situation, if there's ever a time that somebody needs a unconditional support, the unconditional support of another adult, it's them. And it's not just about the baby, it's about this young person and two young people, because there is so much ahead that at the moment for them feels insurmountable. Oh, I'm in college, how am I going to make college? Oh, I got to quit my job. Or how am I going to make this work? Where will I live? And if the family that they come from, whatever that looks like, pushes them away, condemns, and basically unhooks from them, oh my goodness, that's what puts them in an even more vulnerable position. And so our hope in all of this is not to tell people how to do it, but to give them a menu of hope and a lot of options, and mostly to help cast the vision for folks like us to stay connected to their kids and stay in their corner and love them through this. Because for all that is a surprise on day one, I can guarantee you, the first time you hold that baby, your life is going to just explode with love, right? There are no human words to explain that. And sometimes people need a little help from somebody 5-10 years down the road. And so that's our next project, and it's almost done. It'll be out later this year. And again, it's not just our story. We reached out to a lot of other people and organizations to basically have a menu of options and hope where people can get help in their local and regional areas and find the solutions they're looking for when they have this happen.
Oh, okay.
They've done some studies and they've asked some questions of young ladies who have been in that space. And when they asked them about the thing they feared most about their unplanned pregnancy, the largest percentage of them said the thing they feared most was how their dad would think of them, what their dad would say, and how their dad would react. And so I just want to say to any of the dads and the fathers out there, cultivate now a true understanding in your child's heart that you love them completely, that there's nothing they could do that would ever separate them from that love, and that you would go to the ends of the earth for them. And no, they don't just know it. You have to say it. You have to say it every chance you get. And you have to build that in there, because in those moments where they're the most afraid and their future looks very dim to them, the last thing you want them to do is imagine, I can't tell my dad. Right?
Yeah.
What you want them to be running to you and to fall into your arms and say, I made a mistake. I'm in a hard place. Please, Daddy, help me. And so as fathers, we really have to cultivate that kind of sense with our daughters, especially our sons as well, but our daughters in particular, because they're the ones who suffer especially in this space around the abortion issue, they're the ones who are going to carry that when they are at a place maybe where they feel like, I can't tell anybody, I'm afraid to tell my dad, I'm just going to go do this on my own. Mm-hmm. And then carry the emotional and sometimes physical scars of that for the rest of their life. And I know that's not what any dad wants for their little girl.
Absolutely.
So be connected, seek them, love them, and let them know there's always a place for them in your heart.
Tell people how they can get in touch with you and find your products and your work and all that good stuff.
Well, our website is coparentinginternational.com. So coparentinginternational.com. And there's lots of tabs and ways to connect there. There's for parents, there's a connection button to get articles and free resources. For professionals, there's a connection button, and they can, express the interest they have on some of the things we do. And we're always available for coaching and for support, both for professionals and parents. So, and we actually now even have resources in Spanish, where One Heart, Two Homes was translated recently. So we've got other languages being requested. So, that website's the portal to connecting and seeing what's happening. And thank you so much, Kenneth, for having us. And
really appreciate it.
It's so awesome how we can feel so connected across the country like this. And we're so proud of you. And I talk about your books and show them to people all the time. And I love what you're doing, and you inspire me. So
thank you.
Someday we're going to have some kids' books like yours.
No, you will. Let's make that happen. I got a care package I got to send to you now anyway. When we're done, I got to get your mailing address so I can send you something in the mail. But I appreciate the two of you. God bless everything you touch and everything you even vision to step forward to make happen and manifest. And to my I Am Dad podcast listeners, thank you so much for joining us again. You know how I like to leave you. Always be kind to others as you're kind to yourself, or you might find yourself by yourself. Always shoot high for your goals, because even if you miss, you'll be amongst the stars. And as my good friend Art Mitchell and mentor used to always say to me, it's nice to be important, but you know what? It's much more important to be nice. Till next Sunday, God bless.
Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. You've been listening to I Am Dad podcast. We hope that you have been informed, encouraged you to think, or even inspired your heart for the love of dads. The conversation does not end here. Come back and join us next week. Same time, same place. Or you can continue the dialogue on our I Am Dad Facebook page. We also invite you to listen to past episodes, learn more about us, and keep up with special activities by visiting iamdadpodcast.com. That's iamdadpodcast.com. Until next time, I leave you with this reminder of manhood from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Because of this reminder, I will always understand that I am Dad, period.